Hey everybody, it's time for another wrap-up. I have, I think, 6 amazing books to tell you all about, so we better get started. You know how I can talk. Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. How are you all doing? I hope you guys are all doing very, very well. I just realized I've got 2 octopi above my head now. I did some rearranging here in my library since I have the week off, and I sort of rearranged all my books and all the knickknacks and everything like that. So you're seeing some different books behind me, which I think is kind of fun, though it was a lot, and I mean a lot of work. Today I'm here to talk to you guys about the latest set of books that I've read, and I have read some amazing books. I've actually talked about some of these in other videos, but if you stick around for the wrap-ups, here's the time that I'm going to try to sell these to your TBR and see if I can get them in your hands. So, as always, get out your pen, get out your paper, get out your Goodreads, however you keep track of your TBR. If you are so able, please order these books from your local independent bookstore. I think all but 2 of these are out, 2 of them are coming out, but the 2 that are coming out are definitely worth your attention. So let's get started. A book that I've absolutely sung the praise of, was in my top 7 so far of 2020, was in my Pride video, is the amazing The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickels. I cannot rave enough about this book. Set in the mid-1980s, our young main character, you know how I am with name guys, Brian, had just left Ohio and moved to New York City just when the AIDS crisis sort of started, and his boyfriend passes away, and it turns out he is also infected with AIDS. So he decides to go home to a small, tiny Ohio town, basically to pass away. And what this book is about is how that decision affects his town, himself, and also his family, his mother, his father, and his younger sister. Also, his grandmother is a fantastic character in this book. You guys know I was very, very close to my grandma. Actually, this new addition to my video is the blanket that was on the back of her couch for years and years and years. I am a grandma's boy through and through. And so when I see a grandmother sticking up for a grandson, I'm there for it. So, and what happens is, you know, it's 1985. The world doesn't know much about AIDS. As you know, for a long time, the Reagan administration didn't even acknowledge it was going on. So there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of misunderstanding. And, you know, people just did not know how to respond. So what Carter does amazingly well here is he gives us all these different perspectives about how this epidemic was affecting this little town, and it's sort of like a microcosm that sort of gives you a macro idea of what the world must have been like at the time. It is heart-wrenching, it's beautiful, it's just a really amazing story, written amazingly well with heart and care and tenderness, and also reality and a sense of just how hard this whole thing must have been for this entire family. I loved it. If I have not got it into your hands yet by raving about it, hopefully this video will be the one. So there you go. That's The Prettiest Star by Carter Sickels, out from Hubcity Press now. Please get your hands on it. We also love to support our little independent presses. Hubcity Press does amazing work. So yeah, if you can get that book, please do. The next book is probably the most talked about book in the month of June, and that was A Burning by Megha Majumdar, and this is out from Knopf. This book has been everywhere, and rightfully so. So what do we have? We have, at the very beginning of the book, we are informed that there has been a terrorist attack on a train in a certain part of India. And we have a young main character, a young woman who is, you know, working to support her family, her parents, and herself. And she's just gotten her first smartphone, and she goes on Facebook on her phone and she makes a comment that really sort of changes the projection of her entire life, because it is then thought that she was one of the conspirators in this terrorist attack, and she is arrested and put on trial. The other two characters involved are a young trans woman who wants to be an amazing actress and a superstar, who is really, her name is Lovely. Her given name, the name she gave herself, is Lovely, and I absolutely love that. And she is the alibi for our young Javon. She sort of has to make decisions on what she's going to say and how that is going to affect her life by being the alibi. Then we also have Javon's school teacher. He teaches PE, who sort of gets wrapped up one day in a rally, a political rally, and becomes involved with a political group. And he winds up being sort of a man for hire to do things for this group. And he sort of starts to climb the political scale. The book does an amazing job of like sort of outlining for you the underbelly of a political group like this that winds up coming into power, and this teacher winds up sort of climbing the ladder. Now, all of the stories sort of revolve around the trial that Javon is on and how the people of India are looking for someone to blame. She is a young Muslim woman, and there's a lot you will learn about how Muslim Indians are treated and thought of, and this book does an amazing job of that as well. But what it does really is it paints full, complete portraits of these three people. My only sort of thing was at the end of the book, the stories didn't come together as well as I would have liked. It's an amazing debut novel. So much talent here, so much to talk about, so worth your time. I just thought the ending for me was a little like, okay, I'm not sure what I was supposed to take away from it, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I know a lot of people have their hands on this. I'm telling you to read it right now. Read A Birdie. You will not regret it. I promise. Okay, the next book I read was for the Spilling Tea Book Club that my friend Ryan and I put on, and that was Listening Valley by D.E. Stevenson. I'm not going to talk a ton about this book, just some interesting stuff. D.E. Stevenson was a very prolific writer. She wrote for 40 years and wrote over 49 novels. She is related to Robert Louis Stevenson, so she has family pedigree that goes on. She wrote what was called at the time light romances. Now, Listening Valley came out in, I think, 1944, right as sort of World War II was in its midst. And this book is set directly in that time period. We have two young sisters who are raised sort of sheltered. One runs away and marries a man in the military and moves to India, leaving us with our main character, Tonya, who doesn't really know what she's going to do with her life. She winds up meeting a much older man. They wind up getting married, and that's sort of the impetus for Tonya finding her own voice in the world. World War II goes on. They move to London. He is very, very important, very wealthy, and he is very important in the finances of World War II for England. And what happens is, this is no spoiler because he winds up passing away just from the stress of the war. She winds up moving to a tiny house that belongs to her family, but a roundabout way gets back into her possession, and it's in a tiny town, and she becomes a member of that community. And then there's some other stuff that goes on. It is a very light romance. There is, some cute sort of relationships that come from the past to the present and all of that. This book doesn't have a ton of like substance in regards to, you're not going to dig into this book, but this is a fantastic palate cleanser. This is a book that you want to read. It's not hard to read. It's fast to read. You'll like what's going on. A lot of it is extremely telegraphed. There's no surprises, but it's enjoyable. It's fun to read a book like this every once in a while. So that's Listening Valley by D.E. Stevenson. If you want to hear Ryan and I talk about it more, please listen to episode 2 of the Spilling Tea Book Club. We talk about it in even more detail, and you'll learn even more about D.E. Stevenson. So there you go. Okay, another book that I think I talked about in my last book haul video, or January releases and more, and is a book that is very, very much so going to wind up on my top 10 list for the year. And it's a book that, as I talk about it, I find it very hard to talk about because it's so layered. And that is the fantastic You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, out from Catapult Books. This book, you guys. It's hard to explain. Our main character is a young Palestinian woman. We travel through many different time periods. The book starts one day where she's actually walking with her mother, and they're going into they're in Bethlehem, and they're going to go into like this holy structure, and these men that are sitting sort of outside the structure start to sort of make noises and call this young girl names because of the way she's dressed. She's dressed inappropriately for their religion and their culture, and that sort of spawns this whole sort of thought in this girl's head of what is she really? Who is she really? And this conflict between who she wants to be and her culture, her mother, who is very domineering. I hope I'm doing a good job explaining this. I'm thinking about everything in my head. I told you, I'm struggling because it's so good. But what we have at its heart is we have a young bisexual woman who's had many relationships and never actually had any of them succeed because of her own sort of sabotaging of those relationships. So what she decides to do as an adult is she goes away for 28 days to this retreat that's supposed to help her with the things that she is struggling with in her life, her own sort of addiction to failed romance. And as she does that, we get sort of these flashbacks and forwards regarding her life with her partner that just broke up right before she went on this, and the sort of the toxic nature of that because of her, and also her relationship with her mother and how controlling and at times just plain awful she is to her, and how that sort of creates a dynamic. She clearly loves her mother clearly loves her, but their dynamic is all sorts of screwed up. And so this book there's not a lot of plot. This is about one person coming to terms with who they are and sort of digging through their garbage, digging through their past. And it is so relatable and so real and so touching and just beautifully, beautifully written. It's just one of those books that you don't know what you're getting when you go into it. And then once you finish it, you're like, there's a brilliance here. What do I do with it now? And I want a ton of people to read it because I want to talk about it. The title, You Exist Too Much, is what the mother says to the young girl whenever she feels she's sort of going outside the bounds of what's expected. Her mother will say, you exist too much, which I feel as, I know me personally as a gay young man, I would hear stuff like that. You're too over this. You're too flamboyant. You're too this. And I'm sure we each can take sort of that message at some time in our life. Someone has told us we are too much. Yeah, it is brilliant. So again, support your your independent presses. And this is You Exist Too Much. I'm going to hold it up there so you guys can get a good look at that beautiful cover out from Catapult. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Actually, I loved the last 3 books we're going to talk about too. Then I went nonfiction because I am a member of the Graywolf Press, their galley club. So first, I think it's $15 a month. Through the year, they send you, I think, 6 galleys and newsletters and stuff like that. And one of the ones that they sent me was the new Claudia Rankine, Just Us, An American Conversation. Claudia Rankine wrote Citizen, which was a smash hit when it came out. And Just Us is just as amazing. And I have no way to describe this to you. This is a sort of like a personal conversation that Claudia has with you and many people in her life about white privilege and white male privilege, white privilege in general, the difference between how different situations are reacted to, from different perspectives. She does a lot of research. She does a lot of talking, but in the same time, she's a poet. So there's poetry mixed in. There are historical facts in here. There are analyzing different studies. There's just so much in this book. It's almost impossible to talk about in a way that's, you want to sit down and you just want to sort of dissect it with someone. If you are looking for something to help expand your own knowledge about different ways to look at the world and sort of like call to question some of the stuff that you may not even think about here in the US. This is a book that will do that for you. So this is Just Us, An American Conversation by Claudia Rankine. This is out on September 8th, 2020 from Graywolf Press. I think I read this in maybe a weekend, and there's a lot of stuff going on it, but I was absorbed. She has a way with making stuff so digestible, but also so well researched and well thought out. And yeah, all sorts of amazing things. Like, yeah, please pre-order this book. Do it for me. That's Just Us, An American Conversation, out September 8th, 2020. Okay, this book is out. I don't even know how this book wound up on my radar, but it did. And the publisher at this tiny press, Nightboat Books, sent me a copy of this book. And so thank you so much to them. And that is, I gotta hold this in a different way because the title and the author are in a different place. This is Skyland by Andrew Durbin, out now. You can get your hands on this little book. This is the story of a young writer and a friend of his who decide to go to a tiny island in Greece. Our main character is on the hunt for a portrait that was painted by a famous Greek artist that is supposed to be on this island of a writer that he is, for lack of a better term, obsessed with. It is a French writer who wound up dying of AIDS as well. And at the end of his life, he wrote prolifically, fiction, nonfiction, metafiction, all this kind of stuff. And our protagonist becomes obsessed with him. And in one of his books, he mentions that he sits for this portrait. And so our narrator is trying to find the portrait so he can see it. He's obsessed with finding it. So him and his friend go to this Greek island and they spend a week there. And it's sort of like this weird meditation on art and personhood and health and illness and relationships and society, all around books and art. It is one of those books that just your mind will just go, what did I read? But I should probably read it again. It was that good. I think this is for fans of people this is a tiny novella. And I will say, I wanted it a tad longer because there was a couple of strings that I was interested in that I wanted more on. And I get that. In a novella, there's always sort of that piece of the puzzle. But I was just like, oh, please don't be over. I want more, which is, I think, a good sign for Andrew in his little book. But what I will say is if you're a fan of books about books, if you're a fan of things where it's really just you're in the mind of a creative as they try to figure out what they're going to do with something, this is definitely a book for you. And it is fast and it's great. And I don't know how it wound up here. I'm glad I've got it. I want you guys to read it. Get it digitally. If you are a digital reader, have your library order a copy because I think there's a lot to be said. I think also if you're an inspiring writer, this is a great book because it teaches you how to do a lot with very little, if that makes sense. So that is Skyland by Andrew Durbin, and this is out from Nightboat Press. So let me thank them so much. Again, Nightboat Books, for sending me this little copy. I appreciate it. Last but not least, I decided to take a huge left turn, and read a sort of mystery thriller, something that I have not read in a while. And it was completely worth it. And that is Winter Counts by David, Heska, Wanbli, Weiden, out from Ecco Books in August of 2020. Now, David is an enrolled citizen of the I'm not going to say this right, of the Lakota Nation, and he received his MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. So this is an own voice sort of Indian reservation thriller. We have the main character, his name is Virgil Wounded Horse, and he is sort of like the town vigilante. So actually, this book is very, very timely with the Supreme Court's recent decision on Oklahoma, if you guys have done some reading on that. This book talks a lot about how the fact that any crime of any sort of substance has to be tried federally. That the state that that this tribe is in, which is South Dakota, is where the book is set, the state doesn't have the jurisdiction to come on the reservation and try rape or child molestation or anything like that. It all has to do with the federal government. And in a lot of times, the federal government just turns a blind eye. There's a lot of documentation on that. A lot of research goes into it, so you guys can definitely read into that. So what Virgil does is he is the guy they call when something has gone wrong, someone needs someone else to sort of be held accountable to what they have done. He is raising his young nephew, his sister who was killed in a car crash, and his young nephew is a 14-year-old in high school. And what winds up happening is his nephew winds up almost overdosing on heroin. And that brings him into a huge spider web where he is brought in to figure out how heroin is getting to the reservation. And he wants to find out why and how it affected his nephew, but then it turns out to be way bigger than that. There's political intrigue at the tribal level. There are investigations going on at the federal level into drugs being trafficked into the Indian reservation. And there is all sorts of stuff going on regarding drugs and heroin and all of this kind of stuff. And what happens is his nephew they wind up finding a bunch of pills. Someone winds up finding a bunch of pills in his locker at school. He gets arrested, and he's basically being put up as a scapegoat for a bunch of stuff. And Virgil goes on a hunt. He's going to figure this all out. And it winds up becoming much bigger than he originally thought. That is the best way I can describe a book without getting too much into the twists and turns of a thriller, because you guys really need to read it. But what I will say is David does an amazing job of painting this reservation in South Dakota. You can see every building, you can see where they are, you can see the political structure, you can see the people. There's just this real sense of reality to this book. And what he also does is he just delivers on a thriller with twists and turns, and you're like, you don't want certain people to be hurt, and when people get hurt and you're just all over the place, it is so good. I was flying through the pages at the end because I wanted to know what was going to happen. And it kind of, I feel like, sets itself up for a sequel. So David, I'm hoping to see Virgil again. So that is Winter Counts. This is out in August of 2020 from Ecco Books by David Heska, Wanbli, Weiden, out now. Please get your hands on it. It is very, very good. So if you are a thriller reader, may I recommend a thriller? How often do I do that? Not that often, right? I'm trying to get this stack of books so I can hold it up for you guys. So this is the latest stack of books that I've read. I hope every single one of them, that little book is just not able to be seen in there. I hope they all wind up on your TBR. If you guys are a return subscriber, thank you so, so much. If you are new to my channel, I hope that you subscribe and I hope you come back for more. I really appreciate it. As always, I encourage you to shop locally, read globally, and until next time, I wish you happy reading. Bye!